thank you for joining us this morning for our Leadership Roundtable. We're going to have a great discussion about all things employee engagement, employee experience, some diversity and inclusion, and we're really excited. So I'd like to introduce our guest today. We have Soni Basi, who is Head of Talent Management and Acquisition at AIG. She holds a Ph.D. in social psychology and has over 20 years of experience in consulting and leading global organizations and guiding the creation of cutting-edge talent programs. Some of her former roles include VP of Global Talent at Allergan, VP of Global Learning and Talent Development for Estee Lauder, and former Director of Global Learning and Development at Shearing Plow. So thank you so much, Soni, for joining us. I'd like to start off with some questions related to current events. So how can organizational leaders cultivate an inclusive workplace and continue to drive employee engagement? And what is the impact of D&I strategy on creating a positive company culture?
First of all, thank you, Kayleen and Adil and Raquel for having me on this webinar today. I'm really pleased to be joining each of you in this session. I think your question is a really timely one, of course. I think at all organizations, we've all been challenged this year, more so than in previous years, with the question of inclusion, as well as the question of diversity. And so, in thinking about this area, this really important area within an organization, I have to first commend you on your question, that your question is about inclusion, because that at the end of the day is what really sets apart, I think, one organization from another. Oftentimes we will put together, we'll say D&I, right, in the same breath, and the D and the I are really different. So I think in terms of what it takes to drive an engaged workforce, it's really the inclusion side, and the inclusion side comes from your culture. So let me just be really specific on what I mean by D and I. So the D in diversity is really around the numbers, right? It's the metrics. It's whatever you're driving towards in terms of your workforce and how your workforce represents the external markets, the customers that you serve. Inclusion is really about optimizing that mix and making sure that mix of talent that you have feels valued. They feel that their voice matters. They feel that they can make a difference in your organization. And when you're doing all of that really well, that's, I think, what you're doing to drive employee engagement. And it's employee engagement across the board, because sometimes there's some diversity, as we all know. We're looking at surface level diversity, but people are bringing all kinds of diversity with them to the table. And everyone wants to feel that sense of value and that sense of inclusion within an organization. So first off, that's what I would add in. I think in terms of your question about leaders and the role of leaders and the role that leaders play in a company, leaders can do quite a bit, but I would also say all employees have a role to play in driving an inclusive work environment. A lot of times, the companies I've worked at, people will point to the executive team and they'll say, well, take a look at the executive team, right? Look at the executive team. They're maybe not as diverse as we want. And absolutely, that's one part of the equation. But in hiring, in promoting, and developing people, every single manager plays a role. So how diverse our organizations are is a matter of the recruiting, the engagement that every single person is doing around the organization. And that's something that's really measurable as well. So as you're looking at dashboards, you can look at those numbers and see where you might have some pain points in the organization, where you might be having diverse slates, but we're not converting those slates to hires, as an example. Or where you're constantly looking at promotion numbers, but you're not promoting a diverse group of individuals into more senior positions, right? So we all play a role, and certainly leaders have to role model the culture.
For a company who has never put any emphasis on inclusion, what advice would you give a leader to start incorporating inclusion? And Why would this be important for them to do that?
Yeah. So inclusion is one of those areas that's not easy to measure, right? So how included a person feels is difficult, it's not tangible, but the impact of being excluded is really far reaching. If you think about, for example, you're in a meeting and you're maybe the quieter one in the room, and you're taking that chance of saying, I've got this great new idea. And the leader shuts that down and says, yeah, no, we've already got that, right? That's already tackled. The impact on that individual and their desire to speak up and to use their voice in the future is suddenly going to dissipate. And sometimes as leaders, we don't sit back and think about what our words actually mean and do. And so the actions that you can take to create an inclusive work environment are really small. They're things like being the last to speak in a room, encouraging people to come to the table with ideas, right? Taking a chance on somebody who may otherwise always get overlooked. That's starting to create, they're really micro behaviors. And I can actually just give you just a very simple example, if you don't mind my taking that time. But in the Netherlands, everyone in the Netherlands, right, they ride their bikes everywhere. And they were finding that as people were riding their bicycles, drivers of cars were opening up their car doors and they were hitting people on bicycles. And there were a lot of bicycle deaths related to that. And they kept trying to think about what do we do to change this? And it was this micro behavioral change that was the only thing that worked, which was you open the car door with your other hand, right? It forces you to look back. And the number of deaths that have happened has decreased quite a bit. So these micro behavioral changes that you can make in how you deal with team meetings or who you invite to the table make a huge difference.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Simple. Yeah. Doesn't cost anything.
It's a very good example, Soni. Actually, it reminds me from industrial engineering perspective, something we did at one of manufacturing facilities when I was with Bear. Obviously, there was a big push for Kaizen and doing all kinds of cellular cells on manufacturing floor and getting to pull method instead of push methods. I'm sure you remember probably a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I remember doing that worked for me personally is that we would actually videotape a cell, a manufacturing spot, and bring those people in cafeteria, serve lunch, and have them watch, how far they're walking, where they're picking up the parts and bringing it to the next, and how they can maximize productivity while minimizing their fatigue factor, walking back and forth. And even though that some of us knew that the best place for that one machine is there, I made sure that we never say that it should come out from one of them. And as soon as somebody said that, why don't we move this machine here and we'll save 5 or 6 steps. And the idea was, what a great idea. And then they own it. And once the team owns it, it's so easy, to make it happen.
And going back to Kayleen's original question about engagement, right? That's when the power of engagement comes through, is when you feel like you own this and your leadership team has your back, like, yeah, go try that out. That's a fantastic idea. Come back and share it, right? That's when people start to feel engagement. And honestly, in this era right now, in this difficult year that we have, the more that we can encourage people to go after some of the things that matter to them and their ideas, the better off we all are, because people are fatigued and they want to be creative. They want to give you that input. And the more that we do to encourage them to go after things that really matter to them, the better off we are at all of our organizations. That's a great example, a deal of ownership, personal accountability and ownership.
On the topic of employee engagement, what role does employee development play in employee engagement and the overall employee experience?
Yeah, so employee development is huge, and I think that it is one of the main drivers of employee engagement. So I've been in the world of culture for many years. I know you went through my background before, but the first 7 years, I think Adil knows I started working when I was 5, right? So I won't even try to age myself here, but the first 6, 7 years of my career were in the culture world. And when I say the culture world, it was studying employee cultures and really understanding. And actually, I was one of the first ones who defined what employee engagement is. And it's a definition that's still being used by some of our main consulting firms out there. So I was part of a small consulting company called International Survey Research, defined employee engagement for them and how do you measure it. And that company got bought by Towers Watson and, Willis Towers Watson. So it continues to morph. But one of the things that I realized in defining that area of work was that there were 3 things that mattered to people. One was their careers. The second was the strategy of the organization and knowing what the strategy is. And the third was feeling like you're a part of that strategy and your role in the company is to help move that strategy. So employee development and employee engagement are intrinsically linked. And I think some of the tools that Bullseye Engagement has, in particular in terms of measuring employee engagement, are fantastic, right? So that is an area that you want to continue to measure. And you want to know what is driving employee engagement at all times in your company. I'd be surprised if those 3 didn't turn up as one of your top 3s at any other organization. And it is not always about learning. So again, Kayleen, I love your questions. And I know that I didn't give you any feedback on the questions, but you've written them up beautifully because you didn't say learning and development, right? And so let me just give you another example of why this is so important. Kayleen, do you know how to ride a bicycle?
Yes.
I know we talked about bikes in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. How about you, Raquel? Do you know how to ride? Sorry, you're taking a sip of your drink.
Definitely.
Okay, Adil, how about you?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I've never forgotten.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about how you learned how to ride a bicycle. Any examples of how you learned? This is a chance when I'm asking the panel of the questioners the questions.
Well, I started with training wheels first.
Training wheels, okay. What else? Raquel, Adil, how did you learn?
I passed, kind of this training wheel phase because I was the youngest in the family. So my oldest sister got me on a bike and she would hold it. And so I fell a few times to learn the hard way. And I said, I don't want to go down again.
So you better get back on and know how to do it.
I had few scrapes on my knees, and after that, I was balancing it.
All right. Okay. Raquel, anything else in your experience?
Similar to, Adil and Kayleen started with training wheels, and then, the parents would run with me as I'm cycling, and then ultimately mastered it, right?
Right, exactly. So this is an example where none of us sat there in kindergarten or when we were 3 watching a YouTube video or attending a LinkedIn learning course, as much as I like learning courses, right? This is about development, essentially. So this is the other side of the equation is in developing a new skill, you get on the bike, you have the training wheels, you try it out, you have somebody who's coaching you, guiding you, seeing you through the falls. And when you do fall, they're there to say, it's okay, you made a mistake. You get back on and you keep going. That is the fundamental element of what development means in an organization. And again, like inclusion and diversity or D&I, they always get lumped together. L&D, L&D, L&D. We keep talking about L&D. And the L and the D are really different. And so going back to your question about engagement. I know I've said a lot about it already, but absolutely, employee development is so important to employee engagement because it's where you get your value from. You're working all the time. You want to come home, or at the end of the day when you shut down your laptop, if you are already at home, feel that you contributed, that you're making a difference in an organization or for your team. And it's your source of where you get so much in return. And so it comes from your career development, and it is about development. It's not always just about the L, right? So as HR professionals, we have to do both, and we have to measure both. So we have to measure internal mobility as an example. We have to measure the promotions that we have in the organization. So dashboards and real-time data become really important to say, what are the outcomes we're looking for from development, and are we actually hitting those numbers for our people?
In your experience, what are the keys to retaining top talent and keeping talent engaged?
Another great question, Kayleen. So retention is something that maybe right now people are less worried about because of the current economic circumstances. There has been a little less turnover, right? So that said, doesn't mean that there isn't pent up turnover. So as the economy kind of re-energizes, that people who are your best people won't start looking for opportunities, right? Phones are definitely ringing for individuals because there's a war for talent, of the best talent. As the markets are down, people want the best talent to come work for their companies, to get their company to perform even better. And when I think about this question, I actually think about motivators of individuals. So to retain someone, you have to know what motivates them. And, I was having a conversation recently. I love my analogies, Adil, so you'll have to excuse if I'm putting in too many here, but I was having a conversation with a girlfriend the other night, and she was telling me about love languages, right? So you're nodding your heads. Okay, I didn't know about love languages, but there's apparently 5 different love languages. Like, do you like to receive gifts in a relationship? Do you like, praise? Do you like, or, verbal affirmations, and, or do you like, touch? Like, what is the way you like to receive love? And if you and your partner are not on the same page, if your partner thinks, is constantly giving you gifts, but you would be rather receiving something else that is more valuable to you, then you're constantly sparring, right? Like, okay, one person doesn't think that they're doing enough, and the other person thinks that they're doing a lot. So I mention this because I started thinking about love languages in relation to the workplace, because it is a relationship like any other. And if your manager is constantly giving you praise, but what you're really after is the compensation, the two of you are speaking the wrong language as it relates to motivations and retention. So the development planning that you can do, or that you should be doing, begins with understanding what's your employee's motivator, right? Relating it back. And in organizations, I've found that there's usually 3. So you can correct me if you think that there's more than that, but there's usually 3, right? There's either power, and there are 3 Ps, so they're easy to remember. There's usually power dynamics in a company that's a motivator, prestige, or there is praise, right? Those are typically the 3 Ps, and you have to know which one is going to be the most meaningful for your direct reports, and strategize on how to give them those motivators to continue to keep them retained within your organization. So that's my analogy and my short answer in terms of retention strategies.
So how can HR leaders demonstrate the value of their human capital strategies, and how important or relevant is real-time data?
So in terms of the value of your human capital strategy, the first thing is it starts with goal setting at the start of the year. So if you think about performance management and you consider how goals are created in the organization, so many times people will create goals that are not connected to the strategy of the organization. And it begins there. And I know that we've got tools at Bullseye to help with goal setting and the cascading of goals within an organization for performance. But that's when your human capital strategy comes to life. So as your CEO is writing their goals, the HR colleagues should be at the table helping to define what the people or the culture elements are of those goals. And at the end of the year, being able to showcase how we achieve those goals, right? That's our role, is to be helping the organization succeed. That's what HR is here for. HR is the business, right? We're part of the business. And I think your second question here is so important about the role of data. And again, thinking about, more broadly than just HR and the importance of HR being a business, part of the business and acting and thinking like a part of the business. If I was in finance and I didn't come with the numbers, or my numbers were out of date, I'd be thrown out of the room, right? And I think of HR in the exact same way. So absolutely, HR might need a point in time of data for turnover, or a point in time of data for, recruiting numbers or diversity numbers, but they can't be a year out of date, right? They can't be 6 months out of date. You have to choose a point in time for your data that is really close to when you're presenting it, and think like your finance leader. If you're sitting at the table next to whoever your business leader is and finance is on the left and HR should be on the right, and you're both showing up with real-time data that is benchmarkable wherever you've got the benchmarks, trending, you should be able to talk about trends. You should be able to talk about, anything that's going to come up in that meeting. So data is really critical. And I would say the accuracy of data is something I know we struggle with in HR. Every part of the business struggles with accuracy of data, right? Like, we all have to figure out the solution. It's not an HR issue, but we have to figure out the answer for HR. But if I go in, or if I put together a presentation for, say, a board of directors, and, on one slide you show an N size and, a number of employees, and this diversity analysis was 100, and then on another slide, because of the way that the data is reported, it shows an N size of 80, automatically you raise questions about the viability of the data, right? So you have to make sure that your data is as timely as possible, and that it is as accurate as possible. And third, when you're reporting your data, that you have insights. Data is only so powerful as the insights you can draw from it. You can never show up at a leadership presentation and just have like a graph, right? You have to be able to say what that graph means and bring it to life. But having data at your fingertips is what you absolutely need as an HR professional. I can't even overstate it. It's like, it's everything.
So happy that you connected the dots there, Soni. And that was one of the major reasons behind our vision of bringing leadership dashboard and getting SHRM KPIs and ISO KPIs all in one place, to have leaders like yourself, not only relevant data, but real-time data available at your fingertips as you walk in that boardroom. So you're able to put it up, and you're confident that the numbers are current, they're coming directly from the source, and people behind the data are accountable. Make sure that, that you have what you need to drive your point at the board level, in the boardrooms. And secondly, in the days of, we all went through it. People are our biggest assets. That was a tagline, mid 80s, early 90s. And then last year, I saw CFO magazine. And on top of the magazine, it says, how do we put our human capital on the balance sheet? So, your point about connecting financials to human capital is very important. It's time that if you consider people your biggest assets, then you need to figure out a way to bring that to the balance sheet as well and have numbers
Yeah,
to prove it.
that's right. So, I think the one of the lessons I've learned the most in my career have been from finance. To your point, Adil. So if you look at, what a finance leader is presenting when they're talking to any leader, they have their trend lines. They have their external data points. They know what their competitors are doing. And as HR professionals, tools like the ones from Bullseye with all the KPIs in there are so powerful. They put that data in your hands, and there's really no excusing that we show up unprepared, right, at this point in time, because every leader is going to ask, their first question is going to ask you, the first question that they will ask you is that where we want to be, right? And you have to be able to answer that question. How do you know if what you are showcasing is good, or if it needs improvement, or are you spending too much money? How are your benefits comparing? How are your diversity numbers comparing? All of those data are so critical. And so the time that I've spent with finance, really understanding how they showcase their data has been so helpful to me. So I would say to any HR leader listening in today, sit down for an hour with somebody from finance and just ask them like, hey, I've got to present this. Like, what would you do? And they'll be happy to give you a hand and help you showcase, the data in even more smart ways. But you've given people the access to the KPIs, which is amazing.
So does workforce planning add value to an organization during this time of transition and new normal?
Yes, so workforce planning always adds value to an organization. So many of my peers in the talent space have been charged with or challenged with layoffs, furloughs, continuing to consider reductions in force or realignments with the business, given the economic situation that we've all been in this year. And given all of that, workforce planning is probably more important now than ever, right? So you have to consider, when are you going to bring people back in? How many people will you need? What kind of skills do you need now? In the entertainment industry, for example, hospitals, everyone's agendas have changed so much. And so workforce planning, in short, is really critical right now. What I will say is, I'm not sure if a lot of our companies are doing workforce planning really well yet. So tools to help with workforce planning and how to do that well, how to really go about understanding what the future of work will be is important, right? So anything we can do to help one another out is important, but in overall terms, your build strategy, your buy strategy, your borrow strategy, your skills development strategy for any organization, when are you going to bring people back in? What's the timing of it? It's so critical. And it's what you use your data for at the end of the day. So if you've got your workforce planning right, then it's connected to your business strategy. So it's part of your performance management and your goal setting, the alignment to the organizational goals. Excuse me. And it is related to the data that you're then showcasing at all of your meetings, right? Your workforce plan is exactly what it's called. It's your plan for your entire organization. And even if you can, as a starting point, have it for the company or have it for a particular part of your business, you're steps ahead as an HR leader to be able to help the organization through any ups and downs because you've got that plan in place.
Currently, if you look around the adjustments that are going on globally, almost in every space, workforce planning intuitive tool would be so amazing to have for HR professionals. And just I would like Raquel to have probably 30 seconds. Raquel, what are we doing about it?
Sure. So Bullseye Engagement, we've just released our workforce planning tool, which is basically modeling, right? Looking at your current org chart, putting together the what if scenarios if you're going to do some restructuring, if you need to do some decrease, if you need to add people. So not only does it look at the people and the head count and how you can move those positions, again, for the build, borrow, and buy scenario, but it also captures that financial aspect of it as well. So as you're flexing up, flexing down, flexing around, you'll be able to look at that with the different modeling tools that we have within workforce planning. I do actually, Soni, have a question for you in regards to that. So as a seasoned, HR leader, a lot of these HR leaders are very versed and familiar with workforce planning, right? It's kind of, in some organizations, they do it quite well, but probably in more of them, not quite so well. So how does a seasoned HR professional and leader, get the rest of the leadership team to buy in and kind of look at it from a different lens when they're doing their workforce planning?
My answer always in things when you have to start to build, build influence in an organization and build capability is to start small. And so identifying where there are pain points in the organization. So where have you, for example, been really losing talent in the past? Or where have you had a lot of org redesigns in the past? And start there by showcasing how you can use either a tool or a more of a hands-on approach to solving for those needs and introducing that discipline, bringing it up on a regular basis. Like, okay, we agreed, here's the workforce plan, here's some of the areas that we've been looking at, and then you start to build on that year over year. So sometimes it's not a full implementation in year one. You have to always, as an HR professional, know where you're going to be able to get, a core group of people to listen and follow along on your journey, and then start to build on that year over year. So I'd say start small, know where your pain points are with workforce planning, and go after that first. Show the data, start building that discipline, and then over time you'll start to get, that will become more and more of the language. And it's okay if somebody else comes up with the ideas, right? You want, to Adil's point earlier, like you want other people to say, let's move this machine 5 or 6 feet that way. And that is building your case. So you don't have to, I personally will say, egos aside on anything, if I can get my leaders to say, why don't we do more of this? I'm like, absolutely, what a great idea, right? And that's kind of leading the witness to some extent as well. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
In your experience, and you do have amazing experience, some of the organizations that you have worked with, and your contribution to those organizations is amazing.
Thank you.
Welcome. What do you think, in your experience, that a culture where D&I is present in a more, I would say, with leadership's awareness, and it's present intentionally, not by the way. How does that impact culture, and how, in your experience, the impact of D&I on different aspects of the organization, productivity, retention, customer happiness index in those organizations? Just some,
Yeah, so using just a quick analogy, Adil, to your question, I've been thinking about this quite a bit recently, and it's the chicken and the egg, right? It's one of our oldest analogies, I would say, that we come to, but what came first, the chicken or the egg? And I think that's I've been wrestling with that as it relates to diversity and inclusion, because to your point, is it that the inclusive culture and the inclusive work environment is inviting of diversity into the organization, or did the diversity intentionally, as you said, the intentional diversity within an organization lead about to an inclusive culture? And I don't know if I have the answer to that question. I think it's a big question, but there is going to be at some point where the two cross, right? And there's that happy medium. It's the research around diversity and having a population of individuals who represent your customer base, who represent, the clients that you're serving, whoever your patients, etc. The research on the impact that diversity within an organization can have is so substantial that you cannot ignore it. Like the ability to provide new ideas, provide for conversations among individuals who are like-minded or may have a greater understanding of the customer base or the issues or challenges that they're dealing with is really substantial. To your point, that can't happen unless inclusion is there. Because if I'm coming into an organization and I'm really, diverse and I have a lot to offer, but my opinions are not valued or my voice is one that is quietened for whatever reason, whether it's perceived or it's real, and that is an issue in and of itself, if it's perceived or real, then the productivity numbers, the happiness numbers, the customer satisfaction numbers, right? In retail, it's your sales numbers. In hospitals, it's your patient satisfaction numbers. All of those start to fail. So you have to be able to not only have that diversity, but that inclusive environment for the company. It goes hand in hand. But when you have it, every company that's studied that is higher on those two elements is outperforming others in their field, right? It's clear connection between the two.
Maybe just to close things out, no formal question, but if you have anything that's been on your mind lately that you think an HR leader should be aware of in whether it's in current events or maybe something that you've come across starting your new role, just maybe your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a couple of things. One is, I'm in a new role, as you all know, at AIG. It's a fantastic organization undergoing one of the most significant transformations, I would say, of its kind, right? 100-year-old organization, and we know the history of AIG in the last 10 to 13 years with the financial crisis has been there's been a significant focus, and now we're preparing ourselves for the next 100 years. So it's a wonderful time for me to join the organization. I'm really, really happy to have a chance to impact the next 100 years, although I will not be there for 100 years. So that's, I will be there for a while, but not 100 years. The one challenge I would say, as I found in starting a new job in this current environment, is it's really hard to onboard virtually in an organization. And it's harder than I anticipated because, to your point about culture, so many of the cultural nuances are difficult to pick up on WebEx calls. You start to get a feeling for it, but it takes a lot longer than a traditional office-based environment where you get a feel for the culture right from day one. So my one observation and word of advice for our HR leaders or other leaders on the call today or listening in is help people with the onboarding process. Whatever you can do to bring culture to life will return tenfold because it helps leaders to accelerate their onboarding. The second thing I would just note as well is, it's hard to believe that it was in March when we started worrying about COVID, and we all thought it would be a couple of weeks and we'd be back at the office. And we are looking at, as we're planning, so this coming weekend, October 10th is World Suicide Prevention Day, and we're taking a very hard look at mental health at our organization and providing employees with the resources around mental health and emotional well-being, because we are looking at, right around the corner, it's going to be a year, right, of the COVID anniversary for us in the United States, even earlier for China. And with all of that is this, is keep an eye on mental well-being of your people, right? So that's the second piece. But related to that is the return to the workplace. And some companies have started, slowly introducing a return to the workplace. Some companies are holding off. But what does the future of work look like? Real estate strategies, workforce strategies, skills that are going to be more in demand in the future as people are remotely working a lot more than they have been, is an element, I would say, for our HR colleagues to really get your arms around as well. So you can be helping to lead those conversations about the future of work in your organization. So those are, I guess it was 3. I think I said 2, but ended up being 3 about onboarding, mental health and emotional well-being, as well as the future of work.
It reminded me of something I heard. I've never met my grandfather, but my father told me that he used to say, and I'm sure that saying came from somewhere else in India, that you live in this life as if you'll live forever. And you live in this life as if you'll be gone tomorrow. And in either case, if you can figure out the balance, you'll be building bridges.
There, I love that saying.
So
wonderful.
Thank you so much, Soni, for your time. Really appreciate it. And good luck with your 100-year planning. I'm sure you'll have an amazing contribution.
Thank you. I appreciate being invited to the table for the conversation. Thanks for entertaining my analogies and participating in the conversation with me as well.
It was great, Soni. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, I loved your analogies.
Raquel.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights with us.
Absolutely. Thanks,
All the best.
Kayleen.
Stay safe and well.